Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where men share ideas to manage money, the home, and a life full of experiences with our partners.
Every other week, Dr. Ross, Christian, and myself will meet with a guest national thought leader to discuss strategies to manage money with our partners, share lifestyle ideas to live happier and healthier lives, and have some lighthearted laughs. We are a brand new community, so you may be wondering what a modern husband is. If you're listening and you support your partner's career ambitions, if you root for their career successes, if you respect your partner and want to help lead many of the efforts around the home and believe managing money responsibly is important, if you want to live a life full of experiences, you are a modern husband. Welcome to the community. A bit about my co-host. Dr. Ross is an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky, holds a PhD in human development and family science with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy and specialization in financial counseling and financial therapy practices. Christian Sherrill is the director of growth and advocacy at Next Gen Personal Finance. Christian is a Dartmouth grad who holds a degree in economics and Hispanic studies. And Christian's wife, Chelsea Heyman, is an MD, an emergency medicine resident at NYU. And of course, I'm Brian Page, founder of Modern Husbands and husband to my amazing wife, Hope Page. Dr. Ross, Christian, and I are thrilled to have Dr. Billy Hensley here with us today to talk about financial infidelity. Dr. Hensley is the president and CEO of the National Endowment for Financial Education. And under his leadership, NEFE's research agenda has driven the national dialogue about financial education, including one study ranked in the all-time top 5% of social science research index. He is also on the CNBC Financial Wellness Council. Now, before we get to Dr. Hensley, Dr. Ross, would you please share a little about, to our listeners, a little bit about what financial infidelity is and why they should understand it?
Yeah, of course. And I know Dr. Hensley will share his definition and his research, but simply put, financial infidelity, it's any situation in which you keep a secret about money from a loved one. Typically, that's an intimate partner, but also I think that can be expanded to family members, even close friends, someone that is a loved one that you have an intimate relationship with or a personal relationship with, and you're dealing with money. And so these money secrets that can be in terms of how you spend your money, how you save your money, how you invest your money, or even how you feel about money is being used by another partner, but you're not actively talking about that or keeping that from your partner. So typically, the secret about money involves maybe a behavior that's going to be disapproved of. And then there's that intention behind it, that there's an intentional lack of disclosure or communication about that behavior.
All right, well, we need to get some clarification on this.
Yeah.
So Christian and I are going to throw some personal examples your way, and you got to let us know if those are examples of financial infidelity. Christian, why don't we just take turns, if you wouldn't mind, draw into the history books and maybe throw out some past, either, let's just call them examples. Let's not call them mistakes.
And these are 100% actual things that we've done in our lives, Brian?
They are opportunities for growth.
Okay. All right. So let's just say hypothetically, Dr. Ross, I bought my wife a $1,700 pair of diamond earrings, but I didn't tell her how much they were. Is that financial infidelity or not?
Again, that depends. Is it intentional that you're keeping it from her and it's something that she's going to disapprove of? If you have a set amount for gifts, or that she's not going to mind you spending the money on earrings for her, then it's not necessarily going to be financial infidelity. There's not a one size fits all.
So Dr. Ross, are you saying personal finance is personal?
Personal finance is very personal. Yes. It's a good way to put it.
And importantly, you're saying that if she loved the $1,700 pair of earrings, and that's something that perhaps they planned on, not necessarily earrings, that's a good thing to buy a surprise gift for your wife.
It can be. Again, depends on Christian's situation and what they have decided as a couple.
Now, Christian's wife's going to listen to this, so he kind of threw that number out there. But let's say he was just trying to look good, and he actually bought those earrings for $9.99 at Walmart. and spent $1,600 in Vegas with his friends gambling on college football games. Is that an example of financial infidelity?
And I'm assuming he's not telling his wife then about the gambling and keeping that from her. Then, yeah, probably most likely she would have a problem with that. And it would be an example of financial infidelity.
No, we were just asking for a friend there. It wasn't something that Christian did.
Yes. Hypothetically, of course.
Yeah, that's funny though. That's like almost 100% accurate representation. Both of those examples there. Okay, so here's another perfect example. Before we got married, I didn't tell Chelsea this. I secretly bought $250 of Beanie Babies because I thought they were a good investment. Is that financial infidelity?
It very well could be. It's definitely probably not a smart decision, no matter how you look at it. But yeah, that definitely could be if you were together, if you were still in a serious relationship or a committed relationship, and you were at a stage where you were sharing, financial decisions, financial plans with each other, and Chelsea wouldn't approve of it, then yeah, that could be considered financial infidelity.
Now, if that is financial infidelity, is that financial infidelity worse than the fact that he had to confess to spending $250 investing in Beanie Babies? Which is worse?
I think the confession might be worse.
All right, so now
that was what it's the keys of the early 2000s are the Beanie Babies, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but that was last year. That's the problem.
What's old is new again. What's old is new again, friends.
Now, I am clearly only asking for a friend, but what if you give your partner a gift and it just so happens to be a re-gift? So you received a gift, you didn't like the gift, you repackaged it and then gifted it to your partner. Is that financial infidelity?
It might depend on the gift. Again, is it something your partner is going to disapprove of? Is it something that you intentionally want to not disclose to your partner because you think they're going to disapprove of it?
So my friend regifted $250 worth of Beanie Babies. All right, I think probably now is a good time.
You might not be a very good friend giving such a worthless gift.
I think now is a good time to bring in Dr. Hensley.
This podcast is brought to you by Modern Husbands. We are a community of devoted husbands of working spouses who share ideas to manage money, the house, and a life full of experiences. Visit modernhusbands.com to learn more.
Dr. Hensley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about this.
So I know Dr. Ross shared earlier his definition of financial infidelity. So before we dive deeply into this, could you share your own definition of what financial infidelity is?
Well, there's the sort of official language that we use at NEFE when we do this poll, and that is that it's financial infidelity is an act of deception by a partner in a relationship where finances are combined. And so, but I would further sort of translate in that to the everyday language of keeping money secrets from someone you love, who has a vested interest in your financial life. So, it's not just about sort of partnered or paired money. It's if you're living your life with someone or having a financial relationship with someone that you love, that you care about, and you are keeping things from them because of your own shame or your own baggage, not because of their inability to manage money, that's a further explanation, I think, for me in terms of understanding this.
So how big of a problem would you say financial infidelity, financial deception is among couples?
Well, statistically, it's pretty high. It's 43% of people have. Yeah, they've actually, and that's the people who've actually confessed to having ever committed an act of financial deception. And over a third, almost 40%, 39% of those admitted to hiding purchases, bank accounts, statements, bills, or cash. And this isn't we're not talking about where it should be hidden. And I want to put that out front right at the beginning here, that sometimes people hide money because they're putting money away to get away from a bad situation, and I think that is a different conversation than we're having here. But I think that's important. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence is a longtime NEFE ally and partner, and sometimes people that are in that situation need to actually hide a little bit of money so they can get out and get away. But we're talking about sort of this deliberate act against someone who you see as your partner and you want to stay with as your partner. But hiding purchases, bank accounts, and so forth, that's really high, 39%. And I have to say this as an example. I don't know if any of you have seen this show on HBO. It was on several years ago. Bill Paxton, Gene Triplehorn, and a few more folks were in it, but it was called Big Love, and it was about this plural family, if you will.
Yes.
And one of the spouses had all this like mountains of credit card debt, and it came out in like the pilot episode. And that is the first thing I thought about when I started working at NEFE and we did this poll. I was like, oh my gosh, we do that same thing. But it was such a clever visual. So, for the listeners, you could probably Google it and see that scene where she pulls the literal shoebox out from under the bed with all the statements and all the bills and all the totals, and so that's an extreme version of what we're talking about here. But that's what I think about every time we do this poll.
Well, you brought up something interesting. In particular, women who are unfortunately in a position where perhaps their husbands or their boyfriends are the sole provider of income in their household. They can be, as a result, abused significantly from that, controlled by that, and the only way out would be is if they created some sort of cushion to be able to leave that situation. How do you account for that in your studies?
We don't.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a factor that I think needs to be understood, and we're not putting blame to people who need to do that. This is right. I think that's a necessary deception. These are unnecessary deceptions.
I think that's an important distinction, though, between the necessary reasons for financial infidelity versus the not.
Right.
So our listeners are probably wondering, is my partner hiding things from me as we're talking about this? At least I would be. So what are some examples or some signs that your partner may be cheating financially?
Well, let me build a freeway on-ramp here to answer that question. Since I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this are husbands, hopefully are husbands, or considering being a husband someday, that men are more likely to report doing this than women. 47% of men report having committed a financial deception. So almost half of the men that are in this study have reported that as a deception. So how you can know this, coming across a receipt or a piece of paper with a purchase that you don't recognize, that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the sort of the quick thing. If you notice your significant other intercepting bills or email or paying it before the other person knows that it was even due, hurry, the bill comes in, hurry up and pay that. Removing itemized purchases from the monthly portion of the bill. And the partner is defensive or withdrawn on the topic of money. They don't want to talk about it. They avoid it. When we're saying, especially it's always maybe talking about sort of the future, but not like right now, or not how do we get sort of behind, or, it's that avoidance of having the conversation about money. And this isn't just people who have money baggage, or who don't understand it, or who are sort of intimidated or threatened by this topic that we were raised really to not talk about. This is a different scenario where they don't want to talk about the monthly budget. They don't want to talk about spending. They just want to sort of spend as it comes and not really engage on what are the priorities and so forth. So that may indicate that something is going on there that we don't, or that you're not aware of.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting, that especially that men are more likely to commit financial infidelity. So what might be some of the biggest reasons that couples do cheat on each other with money?
Well, 38% say that even though they're in a committed relationship, they believe money should remain private. They should
Hmm.
keep it separate. We shouldn't talk about it. You deal with your money things, I'll deal with my money things. 34% are afraid of being disapproved of by a partner or spouse in a relationship where discussions of finance had already occurred. Maybe it was as a friend of mine says, a pinch. You have that sharp moment or an argument or a disagreement about something, and you're like, oh, I don't want to deal with that again. I just won't talk about it. I won't bring it up. I won't share because I don't want to have that difficult conversation. I don't want to feel shame. I don't want to bring that forward. 33% were just embarrassed or fearful about their own financial situation, their own finances. And then 27% feared disapproval and where they had not even talked about money. So they hadn't really had a lot of conversations about finances, money, budgeting, goals, things like that. But they were fearful for what would transpire in that conversation. So they just completely avoided it altogether. So, and just a couple of other general, I guess, points about this is that there maybe just a lack of frequent and effective communication about money, that it's just something we don't talk about. It's something we don't engage on. Money is meant to be spent, not discussed. It's a means to an end. It's not about building a lifestyle or about building a future together. And then the other piece of this that I think has more potential for understanding is the being in different places or a lack of understanding about each other's financial values. And Lois Vitt is a researcher, and she did some research years ago about financial values, your life values, in terms of like what informs your decision making. So are you a person who likes experiences? Like are you buying the ski lift passes because you want the experience, or are you the person who likes to build sort of the environment at home, so you have the pretty decorator pillows and all the cool things about your house to make it cozy and comfy or pretty or attractive for company? And if you're on different places with that can cause friction, or you don't understand, why are you spending so much money on ski equipment? Versus like our house needs to be decorated beautifully, or whatever the argument would be, or the disagreement, or the lack of understanding about your life values in terms of how money and finances can get you to that place.
I'm glad you brought that up, Billy. When I taught the NEFE's life, we called it the NEFE Life Values Quiz, and it was a foundation of our curriculum, because I personally believe, and I'm being presumptive, but I think you two both probably believe that it's really important that whether we're acting independently or we are acting with our partner, that we have to spend money consistent with what we value most. Because ultimately it comes down to choice, right? I mean, there's no like playbook. At least I don't think there's some sort of playbook that says, hey, here's how you have to spend your money. And you brought up, Billy, that initially that people oftentimes, that partners frequently say, you know what, like I don't want to talk about money with my partner because I refuse to believe that all of that is their business. And this is where I could use, a professional step in, either of you, and tell me if I'm wrong. But I guess my inclination would be that if those feelings are real, why not come up with some sort of method for managing money where you combine some money and perhaps you each have some of your own money, so you don't commit financial infidelity, but yet you still have some freedom to be able to spend money without explaining what you're doing with it. Is that a correct approach, or could it be?
Well, that's part of having the conversation. I think people don't understand that there are different options available to them. They only assume that there's one thing where we dump everything into one checking account, and that's just how it is. And having people, further demystify this topic, and let's just continue to talk about what this means and how do we sort of live our life financially. Part of that is looking at there's a sort of a continuum of available paths forward, if you will. That is definitely one of them. I'm very proud of the fact that my grandparents on my dad's side were pretty progressive when it came to this, that their generation, I don't think modeled this, but they had their own money. They had money together, and my grandmother had her own money and my grandfather had his own money, and it was proportional to how they spent. So my grandmother usually did all of the clothes shopping for my dad and his brothers. The sports activities, my grandfather bought the car, bought the boat. That's how they sort of managed their life. And that's proportionate to how they earned money. She was a bookkeeper and he worked in mining and then ran a small business. So, it's just how they did things. And I remember they talked about that in terms of like, she had her money and how she earned money and kept that. And then on my other side of my family, my grandfather would not, number one, take any job where he couldn't take any of his children to apprentice what he did. Even when they were young, he wouldn't even take the job. And number two, he made sure that all of his daughters had a training in how to make their own money, because he never wanted them to feel trapped because of that. So I feel very fortunate that was modeled, in my life. And that's not bad for some East Kentucky hillbillies, I'd say. I'm really proud of that, that sense of sort of independence and what I saw modeled. And I think, though, sadly, a lot of people growing up didn't see that, or we didn't talk about money. We didn't look at the options available. Like, did your mom or did your dad have a separate account for their fun money or for their hobbies? Hobbies can be expensive. And so then there's no sort of argument about it, hopefully, or fewer arguments about it. And I think there's a whole continuum there that people should be talking about to say what is right for us. And I think my money, your money, and our money is a pretty good path forward.
Well said. I'm thinking back to some things that I saw in your study, and one that really came to mind that I felt like our listeners really needed to hear and understand is what the effects of financial infidelity are on relationships.
Well, 85% of the people who had experienced this said that they had. Well, let me back up, because I start broad with this data. 85% of the people indicated that the deceptions affected their current or past relationships when the money was combined. So meaning it seems a lot more likely where this has happened, you're much more likely that it's happening with the finances are actually combined, which surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. 42% of them said it caused an argument. Almost a third said that it caused less trust in the relationship overall. 20%, so 1 in 5, said less privacy. They felt less privacy in the relationship. So maybe they felt forced out of telling, the situation, and I would assume there's some shame sort of tied to that. And then 16% said it led to a separation of combined finances or divorce. But there is a little bit of a silver lining here that 20% of them said it actually caused them to grow closer, and it caused them to communicate more proactively, which is a nice turn. Like it was like you turned the corner on this sort of ugly experience, this sharp experience, and it allowed you to just, the cards are now on the table. It's the shame isn't holding you back. The baggage of that isn't holding you back. So for some, it helped them grow closer.
It's nice that they were able to turn a negative into a positive like that.
Yeah.
And I know earlier on, Christian and I were just kind of making light of some examples of financial infidelity, having a little bit of fun, but it can absolutely, as you said, Dr. Hensley, be very serious. And it's, as I understand it, it's not just something that's exclusive to married couples, but it can also be something that people just prior to marriage do, where they don't necessarily have thoughtful conversations or transparent conversations about money and the amount of debt they're bringing in to the relationship, which is, I think, as our student loan debt continues to grow, is something that should be top of mind for people before they get married, is, making sure that you each understand what you're going into the marriage with. But with that said, I know Dr. Ross and I were talking about figuring out, okay, if you do suspect somebody is committing financial infidelity, what do you do? How do you approach that?
Yeah. Brace yourself, because it's going to be stressful. It's just like any other difficult conversation. It's going to be stressful. Don't sabotage your partner by hitting them out of nowhere. Don't just drop it on them right before you walk in to have dinner, with your family, be kind and thoughtful about it. You may be upset, so do it in a way where that you can actually have the conversation, you can live through the conversation.
A Facebook post about it is a bad idea.
I would venture to say so. I think most Facebook posts are a bad idea, but which is why I almost never post to Facebook anymore.
But or
yeah.
a Twitter rant or something.
Right. But I think being able to say, you know what, it's Sunday afternoon, we're home, and let's devote some time to have this conversation. We're going to feel what we're going to feel, but let's get to a sense for what we want to do next and how do we move forward. And for some, you may need time, to live with it, because it's hurt. There's hurt there. And know what you want out of the conversation before you have it, and trying to find out why they did it and why they didn't, bring it up. It may be because they never modeled, or never saw modeling, or never ever had a healthy conversation when it came to money, when it came to debt. For so many people, there's so much shame and blame tied to money, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately myself, in terms of my own early experiences with personal finance. There's so much judgment tied to what you should and shouldn't do, and if I look at my own path, a kid who was one generation from poverty, at least through his mom, and I didn't make, quote, wise decisions. I took out student loans and went to a private college. I could have went to a state university, probably with no debt, but that wasn't the right path for me. I made a lot of decisions that were, quote, the ideal path, and then so that when you start to, engage on topics of money, there's a lot of shame or a lot of guilt tied to that, especially if you come from a particular background and you don't have these optimal, I hate that phrase, optimal decisions. I hate the discussions about stop buying coffee and you can buy a home. Do the math. That is a lie.
Right.
I hate that.
That's a myth.
Stop
Consumption.
Toast.
Right. Consumption has a lot to do with what you can and can't do in your financial life. But boiling it down to these, like, well, you're just making bad choices isn't right, and so I think I'm trying to understand where someone's coming from. And when you haven't modeled conversations, when you yourself haven't had a lot of opportunity for thoughtful, quality financial education, healthy dialogue around spending, what does it mean? You shouldn't be shamed if you're the experienced person and that's your life value, versus the person who is like I got to have the beautiful home or the beautiful decor or the great clothes, or, I never buy clothes unless they're on sale, ever. Never, ever. I don't care if I made $1 million a month. I would not pay full price for clothes. But man, I'll go for a great steak and just relish in that $53, filet from wherever. And so that to me is about the experience. It's about that, time. And I'll get like this. Someone gave me the shirt and I've worn the heck out of it. The shirt I'm wearing, for people who can't see, my navy blue polo is about as boring as dad bod kind of clothes as you can get. But it's about the values and what you tie. Yeah, thank you. And so being able to sort of understand that point of view and understand who your partner is on all these other levels, their personality, their experience, their childhood is going to be so present in their money and how they have relationships with money.
And these aren't the kind of conversations that occur when you get a bill in the mail and you see your partner's overspent or you've overspent something that is a surprise and it triggers a fight. And it's these are the conversations that you have when you schedule, they're oftentimes called money dates, but just some time to set aside where, you and your partner can have some pretty meaningful and deep conversations, as you just alluded to, Dr. Hensley, because that's ultimately the only way you're going to be able to build trust. Is that right, Dr. Ross?
Yeah. And I mean, I think, as you said, like we don't grow up getting classes on this, or as Billy, you said, we don't, most of us don't see good modeling for this. So, from your research and from what you've seen, how can you work with your partner to rebuild this trust, after this financial infidelity occurs?
Yeah. There's so much in that. I think, let's be honest, it's going to take time.
Okay.
It's going to take sustained transparency, being above board. It's going to take a commitment from both to stick to the goals you set together. I think the surprise that you're talking about, the bill comes and you're like, oh my, where did this come from? When you've had conversations, or you start to have conversations as prompted by whatever got you to the point where you're having a conversation, is agreeing upon certain kinds of goals and certain levels of transparency and so forth. And when there's a surprise, then something broke in the agreement, and so then you can go back to the agreement, and as a cornerstone for sort of moving forward. But it's going to take a commitment from both to stick to the goals, and then you're going to have to rebuild trust through conversation and transparency. And I think that having conversations, and it's difficult, especially when there's been a severe pinch, an emotional sort of draining experience through the argument, or the, I can't talk to you for a couple of days moment. Those are hard things to push through, and being able to push yourself to go back to it, and regularly, because some folks' instinct is to run, from that, the fight or flight thing. You're going to be like, oh, I never want to feel that again. I don't want to talk about money anymore. And whoops, I went overboard on my last shopping trip, or I went overboard on the concert tickets. I bought that in an emotional moment, thinking I couldn't wait for that experience. And then when they added all the fees on, and I was like, oh no, let's get just a little bit closer. It's going to be better. Let's pay for the meet and greet in the back. When you add all that together, it turns into something that's uncomfortable again.
Well, Dr. Hensley, we really appreciate you joining us today. You're a wealth of information for our listeners. We're going to share on our website a link to the research that Dr. Hensley shared, as well as, I believe it's a PDF of the life values quiz, something that you could perhaps use with your partner to guide a conversation about values and money. And obviously a big thank you to our listeners, and please visit modernhusbands.com for ideas to manage money, the house, and a life full of experiences with your partner. And you can also subscribe to future podcasts at modernhusbands.com.
A big thanks from Dr. Ross, Christian, and myself to today's guest, and of course our listeners. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to today's podcast. You can find our podcast on modernhusbands.com or anywhere you download your podcasts.